everyone, I'm Elisa Tuzzetti, TESOL Italy Gela Group Coordinator, and I'd like to welcome you to this session of the TESOL Italy 48th Convention. Certificate of attendance will be available to download from the convention page of the TESOL Italy website after the convention. Our speaker for this session is Marta Zaninelli. After obtaining a PhD in English literature, Marta commenced her career by teaching business English at Università Cattolica in Milan. She then instructed middle school students in the intercultural curriculum at Collegio San Carlo in Milan. She now holds the position of ELT coordinator at ETS Global. The title of Marta's session is Improving Reading Skills, Engaging Learners Through Literary Exploration. Marta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elisa, and thank you everybody for being here tonight. Let me just share my screen with you. Okay, I hope you can see it. Just interrupt me or let me know should there be any problem.
Yes. Okay.
So again, hello and welcome to my session where I will be exploring a way of hopefully improving your students' reading skills through literary exploration. As Elisa said, my name is Marta. I'm a former middle school and university teacher, and now I work as ELT coordinator within the ELT team at ETS Global. That is the European branch of ETS, so the company behind some important English language assessments, such as the TOEFL IBT. So here is our agenda for today. So after a brief overview of how language, literature, and culture are studied in the Italian school system, I will try to give a brief definition of what can be considered as a literary text. And I saw actually that we've had a session in TESOL Italy, one of the recorded ones yesterday, a very interesting one that I enjoyed watching. Then I'll go on talking about authentic materials and whether or not literature can be considered as authentic material, and why to use literary texts and why they are not so often used. And finally, I will give you two examples that hopefully can be useful for you, for your students. Before starting, I would like to start with a disclaimer. So I know that a lot of teachers already use literature to teach a language, and I know it's not always easy and it cannot be the exclusive way to do so. And that's a given. But the aim of my session is only to try and encourage teachers who avoid using literary texts in language teaching for them to try and include some of these texts. So, okay. In Italy, as per the official teaching program of the Ministry of Education, students are expected to develop proficiency when it comes to foreign languages in two primary domains: language on the one hand and culture/literature on the other hand. Generally, the way to do so is that within the first part of the secondary cycle of education, so what is scuola media, middle school, and the early years of scuola superiore, high school, there's a discernible emphasis on the pragmatic aspects of the language. In this case, of course, I'm talking about English language. So the focus is primarily on refining the fundamental elements of language, so grammar, vocabulary, for example. And this goes on up until the first, generally, couple years of high school. And it is only after establishing a robust language foundation that culture and literature are introduced. Typically, again, starting from the third year of high school. So in the thought of the ministerial program, these two aspects should be connected, the two sides of the same coin. What happens, though, it's that it is often not so. Why? Because this kind of division, while essential for educational planning, could potentially lead students to perceive language, culture, and literature as distinct, separated entities. And this separation may influence students to approach literature as something that is comprehensible and enjoyable and open to them, if you will, only after years of preparatory study. So due to this concern, due to this issue, if you will, teachers are often cautious when it comes to selecting literary texts as a foundation for language instruction, unless, of course, it's the actual literature lesson where these texts are inescapable, I must say. So before going on, I thought it might be helpful to provide a definition of what I mean in this context. I would never try and give a general definition, only in this context, when I say literature and when I talk about classics. So what I took here a definition I like by the Encyclopedia Britannica that says that literature is, of course, a body of written works, and the name has traditionally been applied to those imaginative works of poetry and prose distinguished by the intentions of their authors and the perceived aesthetic excellence of their execution. And when it comes to classics, what I mean in this context, I simply refer to texts, so literary texts, that have endured the test of time, so that remain relevant today after many years. The number of years, of course, is highly debatable, and I wouldn't dare to give a specific number, but classics means a text that remain relevant after years of being written, of being published. And when it comes to training reading comprehension, most language teachers, I hope, would probably agree that incorporating authentic materials into the instruction is useful and even desirable, if you will. Again, if you do not agree, please feel free to use the chat room to just let me know and we can discuss. So by authentic material, we generally tend to use authentic material. Why? And again, I read a quotation that I like. Authenticity is unequivocally a positive attribute. We value authenticity in cuisine, artwork, and merchandise. By the same token, authentic materials in language classrooms are prized as accurate and reliable representations of the target language. So, if we agree that the authentic materials are those that are creative, generally, for native speakers of a language in real life context, the question is, can literary texts fit in the definition of authentic materials? And my personal answer is yes, they can fit. Why? Because literary works are genuine expressions of a language and a culture. They provide students with an exposure to authentic language and diverse vocabulary, as well as cultural nuances. So the next question is, why are they so rarely used? And again, I know it is true that many educators do recognize the benefits of incorporating literature into language instructions, mostly when it comes to reading comprehension. This is not always the case. And the most common practice among teachers is to generally tend to choose different types of texts when working on the reading comprehension skills. And why do they do so? So literary texts are generally rarely used. Again, I'm talking generally here, because of a problem of language, imagery, and culture. And let's see more into depth why. So language. Literary texts are considered to use a complex language, complex structures, elevated vocabulary, and also nuanced themes. And so they are considered to be hard to navigate for language learners. Imagery. They are believed to include an unfamiliar imagery, and so their interpretation can be complicated for students, because the imagery that literary texts include is not something they're generally familiar with. Again, they're believed to. And finally, literary works are believed to contain cultural references and nuances that are not immediately accessible to learners from diverse, different cultural backgrounds, almost creating what is a sort of an inferiority complex towards both the text itself and its author, and so towards, of course, literature in general. But why, and here is kind of the aim of my session, of which I hope to convince you, why should they be used more often? Their texts, because of their value and because they can be a source of motivation. And again, let's see all of these points. So first things first, they are texts. And before being pieces of literature, they are texts. And like every other text, they can serve the same purpose if and when used correctly, of course. And if teachers are the first one to kind of discourage the use or avoid the use of literary texts, they contribute somehow in creating a higher and higher and more insurmountable barrier between students and literature. Secondarily, their value as text is not coincidental. These are exceptional pieces of writing, and they are profoundly enjoyable to read, and they have a high potential to really captivate, to really engage students. And this can be, of course, very positive. And finally, they serve as a tremendous source of additional motivation, because students not only learn by reading literary texts, but they do so by engaging with the very essence of language, the finest possible written expression available. And being able for them to enjoy and to understand and to work on these texts can really boost their morale and can really, I think, accompany them in their English language learning journey. By this, I recognize, and I don't mean to say that this is not challenging. Absolutely, it is challenging, and I know. But I think that this effort can really be fruitful for your students, and so I think it's a challenge worth undertaking. And before going on with a couple examples of how literary texts can be used in assessing and enhancing the reading comprehension skills and in the teaching of English language, let's explore for a second what the reading skills and sub-skills for learners are. And again, if you don't agree or if you feel like adding something, please feel free to use the chat box. So the most relevant reading skills for learners are, and I hope we all agree, general comprehension, read for gist and read for detail, inference, making prediction, summarizing, and paraphrasing. These are the basic reading comprehension skills. And all of these skills can actually be improved, can be honed, assessed through the use and the analysis of literary texts. Again, of course, when chosen according to the proficiency level of the students or the learning objectives of the English language teaching program. I know it's not always the case, but it can very often be. And the first example I would like to show you is an example for young learners. Why specifically for young learners? Again, I base myself on my experience in the Italian school system. Generally, this book, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, is read towards either the end of middle school or the beginning of high school. And it's a text that's very widely read across Italy, as far as I know. Just to give you, for those of you who might not know what the book is about, what the book is, To Kill a Mockingbird by the American novelist Harper Lee was published in the 1960s. And it's set in the 1930s southern part of the United States. And the main themes are racial injustice and moral growth. And everything is explored through the eyes of the protagonist, a young girl named Scout Finch, whose father, Atticus Finch, who's a lawyer, defends an innocent Black man who is falsely accused of raping a white woman. So what can be useful before approaching the reading of such texts? So as a pre-reading activity. On the one hand, linguistically speaking, provide some information about the distinct linguistic features of how the characters speak. They are from the southern part of the United States, the state of Alabama specifically. And so they will have some ways of speaking that may differ from the correct English grammar, of course, not because it's not correct, but because it's dialectal. And secondly, from a thematic point of view, explore the sensitive topics and acknowledge and tell the students that the author's description and her sensibility might differ from what we have today. because her perspective is rooted, of course, in the 1960s. And things have changed today. This happens with every, I think, piece of literature that dates back to some years ago. Just to give you, I do not read everything now. Of course, there's no time, and for time's sake, I will quickly go through that. It's an extract from chapter 5 of the book, and just to give you a general context of what I was working on. And what I propose for an extract of this chapter is a paraphrasing activity. Why paraphrasing activity? Because paraphrasing skills can be very useful for learners at all proficiency levels. They can be used both at an academic level. For example, students, both academic does not necessarily mean university, so it could be middle, high school, and university too, of course. Students must often paraphrase information from articles, from books, when writing papers, during classroom discussion, for oral tests. This is all a paraphrase activity. So it is important for them to practice this skill whenever possible. And while practice paraphrasing skills, the students will probably find that their overall reading comprehension skills will improve. And paraphrase can also help students develop a wider range of vocabulary, a range of sentence structures that are necessary to effectively paraphrase a text. So this is the original excerpt from the text that I use for this paraphrasing activity. Again, as you see, it's just before I show you within a wider context, so into chapter 5, this is just 8 lines of the chapter. And I chose this particular part because, as you see in bold, there are some aspects that can be interesting to build on and to explore in an English language class. For example, I'm going to tell you the paraphrase, then we will go back and forth from the original text to my example of paraphrase. We have future tenses here, or we have some vocabulary like peculiar, inquisitive, very good for building on synonyms. Phrasal verbs, barged in on us. So this is just an example. And this is the example of possible of paraphrase. This was done by me, of course. Ideally, it should be done by your students. So I'll tell you rather than I'm going to tell you, and there can be a lesson about the future tenses. Or again, instead of inquisitive children, peculiar to us, we can put it down to a simpler kind of vocabulary, curious kids, strange rather than peculiar. So again, finding synonyms to bring it back to your students' proficiency level. Or again, I mentioned before the phrasal verbs. If Atticus barged in on us without knocking becomes came into our room without knocking. So again, your students will probably bring it back to their own proficiency level, language proficiency level. And other possible activities with this kind of text can be a classic reading comprehension, so with reading comprehension questions, and inference activities. For example, the students can read part of the chapter and then try to guess what happens next, which is much easier with literary texts than with other kind of texts, because literary texts are built on a storyline generally rather than other kinds of authentic material. Or a teacher could choose to work on vocabulary specifically, trying to either simplify or maybe even look for a more complex vocabulary, again, depending on the student's proficiency level. And a question you might have is, how do I find the right text for my students, whether is it a literary text or not? And an example, something that I use is the Lexile measure. I don't know if you're familiar. I'll just quickly say what it is for those of you who are not. The Lexile measure is a thermometer of sort. So it's a number that indicates a level that allows you to go on the Lexile website to find a great amount of books that are suitable for your students' reading proficiency level. So it allows you to give them a targeted kind of reading experience. As you see here on the right part of the screen, there are several filters. So you can choose fiction, nonfiction, and you can even choose the interests that your students might have, the genre, the category, etc. And so like this, the students can have the best and the most engaging kind of reading experience. And the Lexile measure for the reading is provided, for example, by the TOEFL IBT, both the TOEFL IBT, TOEFL Primary and TOEFL Junior tests, based, of course, on the reading section results for the students. And here is, just for you to know, how to kill a mockingbird looks on the Lexile website. You see the Lexile measure here is 790L, which corresponds to an A2 plus level, more or less. As you can see here, you have the plot and the tags and a series of indicators. For example, the sentence length here, from a scale from easier to harder, it goes toward the harder. While in terms of word frequency, so how common or uncommon the words in the text are, it's on the easier side. And another example for maybe slightly more proficient, of course, young learners, 1110L, so corresponding to a B1, is another literary text, The Happy Prince and Other Stories by Oscar Wilde. As you can see here, both the sentence length and the word frequency mark it as harder than To Kill a Mockingbird. But again, it could be useful for more proficient young learners. And finally, I would like to give you a second example for more proficient, generally older students. Not necessarily we know older means more proficient. That's not always the case, but let's just, for the sake of this intervention, let's say in this case, it's for older and more proficient students. And the example here comes from a poem, because I thought, what are some of the most intimidating literary works? And of course, it's poems rather than prose or novel. But however, what I would like to express here is that we can use poems, even poems, to improve the learner's reading skills. And specifically, this is The Convergence of the Twain by Thomas Hardy, written towards the end of 18th century. And for this poem, what I thought of is an inference activity. Why is inference useful? First of all, while improving the students' reading skills, it encourages students to make predictions. So to try and guess what's next in the text and not to be surprised and not to panic when they find what's coming next. It urges students to ask questions, the right kind of questions about the text. It inspired the students to deduce the meaning of words and sentences. I don't know if it only happened to my students, but I think it's something quite common. Whenever they found a word of which they didn't know the meaning, they went blank, complete panic. I don't know the meaning of this word. I cannot go on. I don't understand. Inference kind of activities help them to kind of go over this hurdle and try and understand a sentence by inferring the sentence, trying to understand the meaning by inferring the meaning rather than knowing the meaning of every single word in the English vocabulary, which is not possible, not even for your native language, probably. And finally, it encourages the learners to share their prior knowledge about the topic, so fostering the creation of meaningful connection and also creative thinking. So the inference activity that I thought of for this poem, The Convergence of the Twain, is to simply ask students, what is the poem about? And how did you come to that understanding? Can you say that this poem is about something? This is an exercise, very short exercise that I would like to do with you too. I will just read this brief extract of the poem. And I would like, if you don't know what the text is about, if you do, it's cheating. But if you don't know, tell me what you think this could be about. So I'll just read. Well, while fashioning this creature of cleven wing, the immanent will that stirs and urges everything, prepared a sinister mate for her, so gaily great, a shape of ice, for the time far and dissociate. And as the smart ship grew in stature, grace, and hue, In shadowy silent distance grew the iceberg too. Alien they seemed to be. No mortal eye could see the intimate welding of their later history. So, does anyone in the audience that is not familiar with the text would want to try to take a guess and tell what the poem is about, inferring this from what they have read? It's okay if you don't want to do it. I'll just give you a couple more minutes, couple more seconds, let's say, and then I'll just say it myself. Okay, so maybe you all know the poem, so that's why you're not guessing, and so you were fair. The poem is about the Titanic and its clash with the iceberg. And of course, the key word there that helps us inferring what the poem is about is grew the iceberg too, that is clearly stated. So as you can see, a text of this nature provides a valuable foundation for language exploration because it offers ample vocabulary for synonym practice, again, paraphrases, for inference, and additionally, of course, it serves as a potential starting point for a literature lesson, so analyzing literature, culture, poetry, in that transitional period between Victorian era and modern age that Thomas Hardy belongs to. So I would like to conclude using the words of a great poet and critic, Ezra Pound, who said that great literature is simply language charged with the meaning to the utmost possible degree. So it's I think that as educators, it is our responsibility to use this valuable gift and to share it with our students. And I think it's essential to recognize that, again, when chosen judiciously and according to the student's proficiency level and so on and so forth, but when this is done, literary texts can offer unique benefits in terms of language complexity, cultural richness, and depth of expression. And so a balanced approach, again, that incorporates both literary and non-literary material can provide a well-rounded reading comprehension experience for our language learners. And with this, I finish, and I thank you all very much for being here today.
Thank you, Marta, for this very inspiring session full of insight and food for thought. So I just want to invite all our attendees to write any questions that they may have using our chat box. So let me check if there are questions in the chat. I don't think so. So I think that we can finish our session. So on behalf of TESOL Italy, I would like to thank Marta and all the participants for taking part in this session. Certificate of attendance will be available to download from the convention page of the TESOL Italy website after the convention. The next session will be our social event starting, I think, in 20 minutes or maybe even less than 20 minutes with Manuela Kelly Calzini. So enjoy our social event, and thank you once again to Marta, and thank you to all the participants. Bye-bye.
Thank you again. Have a good evening. Bye.
You too.